The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today. We're so excited to have you here with us, and we're so happy to have Lelia MacDonald here to share a lot of really great content about recruiting and managing skilled volunteers for your charity. My name is Sandra, and I'm a Digital Marketing Associate at CanadaHelps, and right now I'm just going to take us through a few housekeeping slides. For those of you who are new to CanadaHelps is a social enterprise helping charities. We provide charities with open access to our affordable online fundraising platform and training so that they can better connect with the people who support them. For donors, we offer a one-stop shop for donating and fundraising for any registered Canadian charity online. Since 2000, over 1 million Canadians have donated through CanadaHelps. And right now, I have the pleasure of passing the controls over to Lelia to share her tips and her thoughts with us. Once Lelia is finished with her presentation, as usual, we'll move on to a brief question and answer period so you can ask any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Sandra. I'm Lelia MacDonald. I am a skilled volunteer. I have been volunteering full-time for 5 years. The goal of this presentation is to help you find more volunteers like me. My story is that I did business school twice because I liked it so much, and back in the day I was a marketer in the banks. I loved marketing, and then I went on mat leave, and well, I didn't go back. So now I am fortunate to be in a position where money is no longer a motivator for me. So I want to do marketing. I am a skilled volunteer. I have been volunteering through MAS, Management Advisory Services, for 5 years now. We're a volunteer-run charity. We've been in Toronto for 24 years, and there's 50 others just like me, all in different practice areas. I love volunteering through MAS because MAS gives me the benefits of consulting, so I get interesting work, I get to work from home, I get to choose my time and choose my projects, but it doesn't have the big disadvantage of consulting, and that's because when money doesn't change hands, the power in the relationship stays with me. And the reason why I do it is that I love the intellectual stimulation. Like, as a marketer, I have to instantly absorb the intricacies of each cause, and that's such a challenge. I mean, some days it's breast cancer, next days it's seniors, and that's the challenge that I love. Now, MAS's footprint varies depending on the project. If the project requires in-person meetings, so that would be governance, strategy, or HR, then our region is driving distance from Toronto. But if the project can be done electronically, so that's marketing or fundraising or startups, then we accept clients all across Canada. I encourage you to go to the MAS website. It's masadvise.org, and you just go under About and Publications. We have a lot of publications, free to download. What we're going to talk about today is, do you see that Skilled Volunteers Part 1 and Skilled Volunteers Part 2? Part 1 is written for you. It's written for nonprofits to help them find and manage skilled volunteers. So today's presentation is based on Part 1. Part 2 is not written for you. It's written for you to give to your skilled volunteers that you recruit during their orientation. Because anytime a professional gets a paid job in a new industry, we're oriented, by the new boss and by the peers and that. But as a volunteer, it's the same learning curve, and we're still expected to perform immediately, but there is no support system, which is why MAS created these documents. So Part 2 contains the statistics and the soft stuff so that skilled volunteers can start giving back faster. I encourage you to download them. So what is a skilled volunteer? Well, we are professionals who offer specific expertise. For example, HR, accounting, strategy, marketing. A lot of the nonprofits that work through MAS, we deal directly with the EDs, who are typically specialists in their cause. So they might be social workers or doctors or environmentalists, and they're not necessarily up to speed on all the staff functions, and that's where we fill in. And as well, unlike your typical volunteers who work with you through your operations, we don't. We help management, and we deal almost exclusively with EDs and boards. So why would you need us? Well, we have the exact expertise that you need, and we're short-term. So you don't need to nurture us over time like an employee. We do the project, we fill the need, and then we move on. We are an unbiased third party. So unlike an employee, we can tell you the uncomfortable facts that your employees don't feel comfortable telling you. Unlike a founder, we aren't tied to the way things used to be. And unlike a board member, we don't have pet projects. And we're outsiders, so we're not caught up in the day-to-day crises. So it's much easier for us to see the big picture. And because we're not tied to your cause, we can see your organization with fresh eyes. So a skilled volunteer, we're this weird hybrid. We're not a consultant, but you treat us like a consultant. And we are a volunteer, but you don't treat us like a volunteer. And for example, if you have a volunteer manager, I've never met a volunteer manager. I always deal directly with the AD or above. So most of the nonprofits that work through Mass, initially they don't understand why we do this stuff, because most of the volunteers that you connect with are motivated because of your cause. For example, it's easy to understand why a daughter runs in a marathon for breast cancer if her mother had it. So that connection, that motivation is obvious and logical. But for us, we're not tied to any cause. Our mission is to build capacity in the not-for-profit sector, and we're motivated to use our skills to make you so more efficient. So that's why we're motivated. And not only are we different from consultants, we're also different from your regular volunteers. Like the processes that you've got set up for your regular volunteers probably just don't apply to us. Like you don't have to worry about keeping us committed in the long term, and you don't have to, you know, put us in your database or communicate to us and all. Once your need is filled, we move on. There are typically 3 roles for a skilled volunteer: board member, subcommittee member, and a one-time project. This presentation is going to focus on the second 2 points, the subcommittee and the one-time project. I'm not going to really talk about recruiting board members because there's already a lot of literature out there on board recruitment. I'm not going to repeat that, but there's actually not much out there on how other ways that professionals can volunteer, which is why we made these white papers. Now, Mass only does one-time projects, so if you need a skilled volunteer on a subcommittee for more ongoing, you're going to have to recruit a skilled volunteers. Everything I'm going to say today applies equally to subcommittees and one-time projects. So what am I going to talk about today? Well, when do you need us? And then where do you find skilled volunteers? And then once you've got us, how do you manage us? Well, first of all, when do you need us? Well, the easy answer is when things are not going well. But as a proxy for what you might find in your own nonprofit, here is a list of the requests, the applications that we get at Mass, so it may give you some ideas. For example, strategy and meeting facilitation is the #1 thing, and it's 30% of our business. Then board development and governance. So right there, those 2 are more than 50% of our business. Then marketing and fundraising and HR. What I'm going to do in the next few slides is delve deeply into each one of these. So let's start with strategy. Well, as it turns out, strategy is actually probably one of the most easily self-diagnosed problems, because you either have a current strategic plan and you're following it, or you're not. So it's kind of obvious whether you need help like that. Let's move on to governance. Typical governance projects, well, really 85% of what we do is really assessing, but it's also teaching. I mean, we sound like we're consultants, but we're really teachers. We teach the different governance models and try and figure out which model is the right one for you. And we orient the board and make sure they understand what their roles are and why they have bylaws. And so it's a lot of teaching. Now, what we found with governance is that it can be an awkward conversation to have this and talk about the problems there, just because it's so one-to-one within the board members. So as a way of facilitating a difficult conversation, we developed at Mass this tool. It's called Common Governance Problems. And again, it's on that website, same page. Just download it and circulate it to your board. It's a self-assessment one-pager, and it allows the board to figure out themselves whether or not they need help. And think of it as a way of facilitating an awkward conversation. Now let's move on to marketing, which is the area I work on. Typically I get clients that come to me and they say, oh, we don't like our website, or oh, we need a new logo. And it's up to me to figure out, well, is that the problem or is it a symptom of a deeper problem? And most of the time, it's a symptom. The deeper problem is they need help with their messaging. Of the over 80 clients that I have helped with over the last 5 years, maybe 2 had their messaging right. Now, and I'm not surprised. I mean, communicating succinctly and clearly is a skill that has taken me years to learn. So, of course, it's going to be hard for newcomers to find. So a lot of what I do is figuring out what is the messaging, what are the messages donors need to hear, and your other stakeholders, what do they need to hear. And this is why I like it so much, because what I do all the time is rebrand. Once I figure out that, I make this other stuff. And for people like marketers like me, this stuff is fun stuff. A typical client lasts about 25 hours, and I assist the client free up about 20 hours of their time, spread over the course of like 2 or 3 months. And as a comparison, paid consultants charge, $3,000 to $10,000. And I do everything on PowerPoint, and consultants usually use technology not available to nonprofits. So that's the market. I also help out on the fundraising side too. So when we have a mid-sized nonprofit ask for help, this is what I typically see. They lack revenue diversity. So they typically have a lot of reliance on government grants or maybe one big donor. And they also have a big emphasis on event revenue, which can be risky. They also seem to do the same thing every year because it's comfortable. Why change, right? There's also this desire for a silver bullet because everyone wants funds and no one wants to do the work. When I work with a small nonprofit, what I find is they always have really eager volunteers, but they have no structure and no experience. So they don't have meetings, or if they do have meetings, they don't have agendas, and they don't have a prospect database, and they don't have the tools, they don't have donor letters, they don't know what the plan is. So what I do with a lot of these is I create an annual fundraising plan, and what that does is it channels the passion so that your regular volunteers can be more efficient. Let's turn to HR and see if you have an HR help. About half of what we do on HR is policies practices. See, because at Mass we do a lot of training from the start phase to the growing phase, and those have to develop a lot of infrastructure. And one of the first bits of infrastructure is the HR policy. Those volunteer consultants really busy. Now, as nonprofits, they grow and they age in that, they reach different life stages. And what I have found is that when I'm working with a nonprofit in the life stage, typically that's a one-off project and it's always just about the marketing. But when I have a client that is transitioning between life stages, they have a whole bunch of marketing they're trying to struggle with. And so for those nonprofits, what I do is I give this tool. It's a great tool. I wish Mass had made it because it's so fabulous, but it's somebody else's. It's called speakmanconsulting.com. They're a for-profit consultant in the States, but again, it's free on their website, and download it and give it to your board. What it is, this goes on for about 5 pages. It's so detailed, and each column is the life stage, and each row are the different staff functions. And so what it does is it allows you to predict what trap you're about to fall into as you grow in your life stages, and it just helps you self-diagnose better. So I'm talking a lot about diagnosing and triaging and that, and what a nonprofit asks for is not necessarily what they need. So for example, in the marketing area, about 1/3 of my clients accurately self-diagnose, which means 2/3 of them don't accurately self-diagnose. When Mass volunteers, when we get together and socialize, this is the one slide we all agree on in all practice areas. But it's to be expected. I mean, we're the experts. It's really our job to diagnose what the real problem is, and it's not really your job. But what happens, though, is if you're a volunteer manager for your nonprofit, if an employee comes to you and it requests like a skilled volunteer for problem X, well, heads up, chances are 2/3 of the time, problem X is not the problem, it's a symptom of a deeper problem. So when you're recruiting skilled volunteers, just look for skills, don't necessarily recruit for a specific project. It's really our job to diagnose. So here's 2 examples to explain what I'm talking about. I once had a client who they had a nonprofit board. They did not feel comfortable being ambassadors for the brand. So they booked a day-long session, and then they invited me to facilitate it. And they said, you know, we need spokesperson training. I was a little bit concerned about this, but I dug a little bit deeper, and it turns out the uncomfortable board was not the problem, it was a symptom. The real problem was the messages on their website were not clear. Well, the website is the foundation of your brand. If it's not clear, well, no wonder the board wasn't feeling comfortable being ambassadors. And by the way, probably the volunteers weren't comfortable, and probably the donors are confused. So the problem was they needed a clearer website. Here's another client. They came to us and said, we need more donors. We need more money. So can you help us organize a golf tournament? Okay, well, slow down here. Sometimes nonprofits need new donors to acquire new donors. Sometimes they just need to retain the donors they've already got. So you have to sort of figure out what's the problem. Is it acquisition or retention? So as a volunteer manager, it's really just recruit for the skills, let us diagnose. Now, a lot of the times what we get at Mass is clients that have multiple needs. And this is the hierarchy that we follow through. So we start with governance, try and fix that. Then we assign a strategy volunteer. Then we assign an HR volunteer. And then I come in with the marketing and the fundraising. Well, and that's great, because as a marketer, good marketing needs the foundation of a good strategy and good governance and good HR. Here's an interesting statistic. About 2/3 of the nonprofits I work with, the projects proceed normally. Everything's fine. Yeah. And at the end, yeah, thanks very much. Yeah. And then 1/3 of them, bombs go off. And I never see these bombs coming. Well, it's because problems with marketing projects are never caused by marketing. They're caused by HR and they're caused by governance. So if you have multiple needs, please, as a volunteer manager, start recruiting your more foundational needs before recruiting the later needs. Now, here's an example that I've had to deal with, unfortunately, several times. And remember I showed you that chart with the life stages? Well, when a nonprofit is transitioning from startup to growing, the big trap there is the role of the founder. And it is such a touchy issue. Some founders, you know, who had the skill set to create a nonprofit from scratch, do not have the skill set to manage it. It's called the founder syndrome, and Google it. Wikipedia has a fabulous definition of it. Well, founder syndrome is a problem in governance and HR, and it has to be solved by those skilled volunteers. The thing is that the symptoms of this pop up in marketing and fundraising, and it paralyzes the work I do, but it's not a marketing problem, and I can't solve it. So that's why. Now, we had some great questions sent in from Madhav. How to deal with an organization's inflexibility with creating volunteer roles. And a question from Amy. How do you help people to accept change? Fabulous questions. I have no idea how to answer them because I'm a marketer. I'm not an HR person. So you need to rearrange your hierarchy and start with an HR expert who can help you out, because when I look at that, I'm not an expert in HR, but I sort of wonder, you know, what's the symptom or what's the problem here? Is the inflexibility the symptom? That, like, there has to be something deeper that caused this inflexibility to happen at the to start with and to fester. So you need an expert in there who can really diagnose that. And then both Madhav and Amy, you better be prepared with a governance volunteer pretty soon thereafter, because hey, your board allowed this inflexibility to grow, and so you know they might be part of the problem in that. So you probably need to start HR and then governance right away. We got a great question from Jane. We have a process to select candidates, but our directors bring on volunteers they know versus ones we need. Great question. Again, I don't know the answer to that because I'm a marketer. I'm not a governance expert. But, you know, it really sounds like you need a governance expert in there to present to your board, like a refresher course to your board, to what are their roles, and figure out why is it that they're doing this. You need a governance expert right away. Let's do a time check. So we've talked about when you need us so that you can hopefully self-diagnose a little bit better. Now, where do you find us? You can find a skilled volunteer at any age. Now there's two kind of sweet spots. There's the 30-year-olds and then the 50 and 60-year-olds. So and the difference is the motivations. So 30-year-olds, they are recent graduates and they are motivated to build their careers. So they want to do things that are going to look great on their resume. The 50 and 60-year-olds, that's where I am. We're motivated to use the skills we learned in our careers because we want to keep intellectually stimulated. So there in Toronto, there are two charities that have been developed. Now, Endeavour is the one for the recent graduates. Now, they only do strategy assignments. They do about 12 projects a year, and because they work in a team environment, each project's about 200 hours. Now, I work with through Mass, and we take on just about any question a nonprofit can ask us, but the big areas are strategy, governance, HR, marketing, and fundraising. And this year, we're really busy. We're going to do about 250 projects per this year. And because we work individually, each project takes about 25 hours of volunteers' time. And we've been going for 20 years. There are others. In the younger end, usually most universities have a pro bono arm for their business schools. And then there's also social venture partners. They only take on about 3 projects per year. And then there's the ones in the middle, the pop-ups and the consulting firms. So what's a pop-up? A pop-up is an unemployed professional who wants to fill a gap in their resume. Okay, so a bit of caution here. And the caution has nothing to do with competency. They may be perfectly qualified. The issue is their motivation, because once they get a job, their motivation disappears, which means they disappear even if it's in the middle of the project. So this is not about competency. So Endeavour, both Endeavour and Mass do not accept volunteers who are actively seeking a job, because we have both learned the hard way, they disappear. For-profit consultants who want to build their portfolio. Okay, so a bit of a caution for large nonprofits. Really, all this consultant will want is they'll want to put your logo on their website. So are you okay with that? The caution is more for small nonprofits, because one thing I've learned in this consulting business is that every consultant has their own process. So a for-profit consultant would have created a client management process for their typical customers, which are typically large organizations with bureaucracy and politics and that. But if you're a small nonprofit and you don't have bureaucracy, if they insist on mapping their process onto you, it just may be overkill, and you may be expected to do things that are just not necessary. So otherwise, it's a great source of skilled volunteers. Just as an aside, I have had to learn 2 different client management processes. I have one process for consulting small organizations and one for large, and they are night and day different. So where do you find us? Well, you make a job description as best you can, and then you circulate it out to the world. So the volunteer postings, the big one is Charity Village and also Volunteer Toronto. Post on LinkedIn, your own website and Facebook, your own board of directors to forward to their connections. We got a question from Janet. How do I motivate my board to recruit? Well, there may be more to this than that, but certainly make it easy. So put a volunteer description, job description, into an email with a little bit of an intro and send it as an individual email, send it out. So all they have to do, all your board members have to do, is forward it to a few of their connections. Hopefully they can do that. Local companies with a large head office. Now, you can either ask them if they would donate the time of their staff, or you can circulate this job description internally to find an employee who will volunteer on their own time. So I got a great question from Lori. She's looking for fundraising volunteers and can't find them. Well, my suggestion is go to a local company with a large sales department, because the process of for-profit sales is very similar to the process of nonprofit fundraising. You know, you have to identify leads, you have to close the sale. Now, what you probably want to look for, I mean, you could look for a large retail sales department, but what you really want is a corporation that does a lot of business-to-business selling, because the skill set that a business-to-business salesperson has is identical to the skills that you need for approaching a major donor or for requesting sponsorship deals. So you could go to this large head office and you could either ask for volunteers to actually do your fundraising for you, or you could approach them and say, hey, can you come in and teach my regular volunteers how to be better fundraisers? How do you identify a lead? How do you close a sale? How do you follow up? All this stuff, this is what they do in their day job. They can replicate it for you. If you're looking for governance help, again, go to a local company, but look at their board of directors and check them out, because they may have a director who has taken a course called the ICD course. That's the Institute of Corporate Directors. Fabulous, very thorough course. And maybe you could approach this board member to present to your board what they learned in this course and then how it applies to your problems in there. If you're looking for HR help, well, you could go to a large head office and they probably have a very large HR department. You could also, there's an association of HR professionals. Well, you go to the local chapter, maybe they can circulate it to their members. You can go, again, to the local consulting firm for pro bono help, or universities. Now, that's either the pro bono arm or the alumni, or business professors are really well connected with the local community. They may know people who can help you out. Or you could apply to Mass and Endeavour. You just go onto our website and hopefully we can take you on. Rochelle sent in a question, how do I find volunteers in a small community? Well, Rochelle, I mean, you can try all this, but chances are you're not going to find someone. So you may have to work electronically with someone, either in a local town or a local university, or maybe you can drive halfway and rendezvous, or well, Mass, we sometimes work remotely too, depending on the project. So you send out your job description and you just get it all out there. That's the easy part. Now's the hard part. You wait. And wait. There are a lot of potential skilled volunteers out there that have the skill set. It's really all about the motivation and the time that they have available. I know at Mass we're constantly recruiting. So don't underestimate how long it's going to take you to find someone who's interested. So let's say you get someone who applies. What do you look for? Well, okay, sure. So listening skills, yeah. Focuses on your needs and doesn't brag about their own accomplishments. Uses language that you can understand and doesn't use big words to make themselves feel important. And you know, this may be one of the big differences between younger skilled volunteers and older skilled volunteers, that the younger ones may need the armor of fancy words because they may not feel comfortable yet in their competencies yet. Older volunteers understand it is far more powerful to speak in plain English. Spirit of collaboration. So just someone who's willing to dig in and work with you and help you set priorities, not dictate to you. You know, when you read the literature on what makes a good consultant, that is the deciding factor. Fresh perspective and then available time. Now, when you're talking to a skilled volunteer, you know, I say, well, treat them like a consultant. Well, how do you pay them in ways other than money? Well, you understand what's in it for them. This is probably, of the entire slideshow, this is probably the most important slide. When I'm interviewing potential recruits for Mass, this is all I care about, because I can tell from their resume whether they can competently handle the work. It's not about, it's all about the motivation, and maybe only 50% of the people who apply we actually accept. So if you're a volunteer manager, I hope you get at least 2 or 3 applications, because maybe only one is going to be a good fit. So recent graduates, they want to build their resume with concrete examples, like I helped a nonprofit reduce costs by X% or grow revenue by X%. That's really powerful on a resume. Apply their education to a new industry. Okay, when you're building your career, it is so important to get lateral experience. But in Canada, there really are few industries. So volunteering is a great way to get that lateral experience with no risk to your day job. And learn how to be a consultant. 5 years ago, I didn't know how to be a consultant. Being the consultant is a great skill, and you need to learn that. Now this is why I volunteer. I volunteer, but I fear doing, okay, I don't want to be a docent, I don't want to be a driver, I don't want to help you with your operations. I do want to fill my time with meaningful part-time work. And the other reason is that I see the difference I make. You know, my career, when I was an employee of a large organization with established brands, all the big fun decisions had been decided before I even arrived. So it's really hard to measure the impact that I had on my brand. But now I see the difference between a client's old website and their new website and how they're messaging more clear. And at the end of the day, I know why my clients need me. You know, my clients ask me at the end of an assignment, oh, you know, thank you, how can we thank you? And that, you know what I tell them? I tell them, do what I tell you to do. It's similar to a doctor, like who has patients, you know, well, smoke too much and drink too much and we don't exercise, the doctor tells us to do. And as a doctor, it's so disturbing when you get a patient who actually does what you do better. Well, that's why doctors go to medical school. After all, it's no longer about money. It's about making people better. So when I go to parties and I meet other marketers that are still working in the for-profit sector, when I tell them what I do, their jaws drop. They cannot believe how lucky I am. You know, a marketer's job is, you know, sort of 80-20, you know, 80% is the stuff you got to do and the 20% is the fun stuff. Well, all I do is 20%. You don't have to pay me to do this. I want to do this. So you need to understand the motivation of your skilled volunteer because that's how you're going to pay them. Let's do a time check. You know, when you need us, where to find us? Now, you got one of us. What do you do with us? Well, chances are this skilled volunteer that you've just recruited is going to be like I was 5 years ago. You know, my experience, so I was an employee in a marketing department of a large corporation. I had no consulting experience. I knew marketing, but I didn't know how to do consulting. So as a volunteer manager, I'm telling you, you treat them like a consultant. But your skilled volunteer won't know what that means. So here's what we do at Mass. We set a proposal and we clarify our expectations up front. And then at the end, we finish with a close form. So Karen sent in a good question. How do you ensure that a skilled volunteer honors their commitment after orientation? Well, that's a hard one to do. But to increase the likelihood of success of that happening, think of this proposal as like a job offer or as a consulting contract. Like formalize it so that people recognize that this is what they're expected to do and they want to do it. Hopefully that can increase your success, Karen. But that close form, don't let the relationship wither at the end because that close form is the way you pay your skilled volunteer because it says the results that the skilled volunteer did. So for a young skilled volunteer, that's your permission to put that on their resume. And by the way, if you need to be asked, if you're going to be asked for a reference, you need that close form to make sure you can give the correct information. And for older volunteers, well, I get a sense of accomplishment. Yeah, I did that. That's really great. So Darlene sent in a question. How do you thank skilled volunteers? This is it, the project close form. Summarize what they did at the end. It gives a great sense of closure. Now I'm going to talk about general tips to prepare you for your skilled volunteer. Well, I mentioned before, orient your volunteer. So that part 2 that's on the Mass website publication, give them the part 2. Approach from a position of strength. You are offering a great opportunity. You're allowing people to do the fun stuff. You are a breath of fresh air. Don't expect professionals will be emotionally tied to your cause. Okay, professionals love their profession and adapting to new challenges and challenging themselves intellectually. You know, one day I'm working on homelessness, then it's cancer, and then it's, you know, for me, it's the variety that's exciting. Don't expect professionals will want to be board members. Now, for skilled volunteers at the beginning of their career, they need to focus on honing their skills within their profession. So they're probably not going to be interested in board work. But for skilled volunteers at the end of their career, sure, some may want to hone their skills outside their profession, so you can offer them a board position. But, you know, at Mass, you know, maybe 50% of us are on a board and the other 50% not interested. expect professionals to work faster. Okay, back when I was working, you know, every deadline was yesterday, and professionals like expect work to be done quickly, so prepare your staff. So in marketing, marketers operate in a hierarchy where decisions are made faster than in a consensus environment. And, you know, even after 5 years, I still have to consciously slow myself down. And the biggest one of all, sensitize your employees to for-profit language. Okay. The concepts in the for-profit industries and the not-for-profit industries are similar. It's just the language that you use to discuss these concepts is different. Now, in the for-profit world, different languages in different industries is common, and it's actually appreciated because that's how you get new ideas. So a new idea in the airline industry can be repeated in the grocery industry and that. But for some reason, in the not-for-profit industry, business terminology can just trigger this unexpected emotion. And so, for example, during my conversations, I have to consciously avoid using the term competitors. And instead I use the term alternate providers, or else I get, you know, the lecture how we're all working together. Yeah. So switching between the for-profit and the not-for-profit language is still a challenge for me. And you know what? It's more than just the vocabulary, and it's more than just the double bottom line. It goes to the content of what I'm saying. Like I talk about churn in the donor portfolio and efficiency of the revenue stream. So it's language that's not commonly used, but it's also the concepts are not common in the not-for-profit sector. So as an aside, I mean, fortunately for me, I don't have to worry too much about toning down my business language because I typically deal with executive directors directly, and they get me, they understand. So I can sort of relax and just talk business talk. But if I'm talking to an ED and there's another employee in the room, I'm on red alert. So now we're going to talk about different subject areas and tips to help you prepare for that. In the HR area, you're probably going to recruit someone from a large organization that has everything all taken care of, and they sort of take things for granted. And it's going to be a real shock for them to come and work for a small informal organization. So they need to be creative because you probably don't have a lot of money to throw around. So you need to adjust their expectations. And establish upfront the depth of work needed. Now, this is apparently a very common problem in HR because there's this conflict about, you know, do you want help with basic work like writing job descriptions, or do you want help with strategic work like recruiting strategies and that? So you got to figure out the depth of what you want. Now let's move on to strategy. There are as many ways of doing strategic planning as there are strategic planners. Every strategic planner I've ever met, they have sort of, you know, their favorite way of doing strategic planning that they are comfortable with. And well, as a volunteer manager, just expect, you know, differing points of view. So provide background material. Okay, so this is important for strategy, but also for marketers, because our two product areas, we need to become instant experts in your cause. So you need to give us a ton of background information, not only on you, but on your cause. And just the more information, the faster the skilled volunteer can get up to speed. And then board must engage in the project. Okay, strategy documents take a lot of board time, and so they have to make sure they are willing to free up their time. Now let's talk about marketing, which is my area. Good marketing is deceptively hard. Okay, marketing done badly is really easy to do, but at its core, marketing is just common sense. It's unbelievable how uncommon common sense is, though. Marketers are generalists or specialists. Okay, we in the marketing industry, we've created this problem for ourselves because we all call ourselves marketers. We're not, and it must be so confusing for outsiders. A marketing specialist is a writer, a graphic artist, a consultant, and everyone thinks that, you know, Mad Men TV program, they're all marketers, but they're actually specialists. They specialize in one area of marketing called advertising, but marketing is bigger than advertising. Then there are generalists. I am a marketing generalist. We're product marketers. We work in large organizations, and no one does TV shows on generalist marketers. But every large nonprofit should have a generalist marketer on staff, And mid and small nonprofits, you need to recruit generalists. And typically a generalist marketer, we have friends that are specialists. We can pull them in when we need them. These 2 points are really difficult to talk about. The distinction between marketing and fundraising. In for-profit corporations, sales departments are completely separate from marketing departments. And salespeople and marketers differ in every way, in personality type, in skills, in emotional triggers, in timeframes. A salesperson would not be expected to handle a marketing assignment any more than an accountant would. And similarly in large nonprofits, there is that distinction between a marketing function and the sales or the fundraising departments. They're separate and they're equal. But in small nonprofit, there appears to be this expectation that fundraisers will also do marketing. And this causes a huge sense of unease, which leads me to my second point. Carefully select the other employees who will work with the marketer. Don't assume that your fundraising staff should be involved when in fact they may feel threatened. Like, well, any outsider is threatening. But for us, like it's good reason, because sometimes my analysis will drastically impact their jobs. I have occasionally made recommendations that projects are terminated. No wonder fundraisers fear me. And you know, one difference between a consultant and a volunteer is that staff won't yell at a volunteer, but they will yell at a consultant. So yep, I've been publicly criticized and yelled at and fired and angry notes sent to me, and I've had enough experience, so I don't take it personally, because I know these people, these employees they may see me as the writing on the wall, and they may have a lot of fears and they just sort of lash out at me. It's really not me, it's my ideas that I'm proposing that are so fearful for them. So as a volunteer manager, if you have a new skilled volunteer that's just starting out and they start getting yelled at by an employee, that would freak me out. So please protect your skilled volunteers. When to walk away. Okay, at Mass, this doesn't tend to happen very often because Mass has 2 filtering processes. We filter clients. At Mass, about a quarter of the projects are pre-filtered out, and at Endeavour, it's about 50%. By the time a project reaches a volunteer, it's been vetted. We filter the skilled volunteers before joining Mass, you know, like maybe only 50% of the people we accept. But if you're a volunteer manager on your own, you have to be your own filter. So there may be that hesitation about the project. It may be too much. There hesitation about the volunteer, or the project ends up being not right for the volunteer. Let me use an example in marketing to explain that. There are 2 sides to marketing, the creative side and the analytical side. So some marketers may feel more comfortable on the creative side, like writing brochures and designing websites and that. Some marketers feel more comfortable on the analytical side, so you know, like crunching your revenue and calculating donor churn and that. So if you bring in a marketing generalist and who likes creativity, and after the diagnosis, oops, you need help on the analytical side, you may need to find another marketing generalist. The project may be overwhelming, in which case, you know, break it up into stages maybe. If the chemistry is there, and also if there is no staff assigned, in marketing I insist that staff set aside at least 20 hours, and if they don't, we delay the project until they're ready. That's a big signal to me. What to expect. As I'm coming to the end of my presentation here, I decided to pull this in. This is in the part 2, the orientation package for the skilled volunteer. I want to mention it here because I thought you might be interested in it, because what I'm about to say here is from the volunteer's point of view looking at you. Expect that no one in a small nonprofit will understand the fundamental principles of your, okay, it took me at least 3 years to figure out how to explain what I do to non-marketers. Like back in the day, I was always surrounded by other marketers who understood what I did. I was like a fish that didn't notice the water around me. But then when I volunteered, I met all these people who had no idea what was marketing, well, other than madmen, and I was a fish out of water. I didn't have the language to explain what I did to someone who has no idea what I did. So, I mean, eventually I figured it out. Now I use an analogy in that. But initially it was really awkward how to describe what I did. Expect resistance. Okay, so I've already talked about the resistance I get from fundraisers. I was talking to my strategy colleagues, and they get resistance from senior management, EDs and the direct reports, who feel that, you know, seeking external advice is a sign of their own weaknesses, and they sometimes have a bit of a chip on their shoulder. Governance. I asked my governance colleagues, and they get resistance from board chairs and from founders who, you know, like the way things have been done in the past and don't want to change. So it is almost guaranteed your skilled volunteer will experience resistance from someone somewhere in the nonprofit. So I just hope they don't take it personally. Nonprofits do not know how to manage you. Okay, so for the 5 years I've volunteered, I've never ever met a volunteer coordinator. I only work with the EDs and the boards. So if you as a volunteer manager have established procedures on how to deal with volunteers, you might want to tell your ED to follow them, because we will never meet you. So we are this weird hybrid between consultants and your regular volunteers. Skilled volunteers are different. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I wish you luck in finding a skilled volunteer. We are out there. There's lots of us. You just have to find us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lelia. That was great. Are you ready for a couple of questions? I know we have about 10 minutes here left in our webinar. Well, yeah, so we're just going to start with a few questions here. Definitely keep your questions coming into the chat log. I can see a lot are coming in. The first question is, what do you not like about being a skilled volunteer?
Okay, thanks. Well, I already mentioned, you know, how as a marketer, problems with marketing projects are never about marketing and the bombs that go off. So I won't repeat that. But there's another thing too, and I think this applies with a lot of the other practice areas. And it's not that it's just sad. Because remember, at Mass, we deal with all sizes and states of nonprofits. And quite frequently, we get nonprofits that just do not have the capacity to do even the minimum of what, and I'm not telling them to do much, I'm doing a lot of it myself, but they can't even do the minimum. And it's sort of up to us to sort of have the talk about how it's time to either downsize or shut down. And it's just a sad conversation that I don't like, but I don't like that much. Should I answer the second question I see here?
Yep.
How else can a nonprofit orient a new skilled volunteer they've just recruited? Okay, well, I mentioned part 2 and on the Mass website, and I also mentioned in the strategy and marketing, those, if that's the volunteers that you're recruiting, we need information on your cause, not only just on you. And then I think it's probably just a conversation about how to be a consultant and what your expectations are, because they may not know what it means to be a consultant. And then probably another conversation about the differences between their for-profit world and their not-for-profit world. I can speak to the marketing area. For-profit marketing is really quite large, and the not-for-profit is a subset of it. It's not that not-for-profit is different, it's just a subset. And one of the big hurdles for me was to let go of all the other stuff and say, it's okay, I can ignore all this other stuff, this is the only part that applies. And that letting go was kind of hard for me to get over. Eventually I did, though. But you know what the biggest thing I've had is the difference between large versus small organizations. And just if you work in a large, there's no one else to get approvals from. It's just a really different feel to it, and they may be struggling with that distinction.
So we got another question from someone asking, you mentioned using LinkedIn or Charity Village. Do you recommend seeking volunteers on social media? Yes. Yes, get the word out at whatever works for you, because you never know who knows someone knows someone knows someone, and just spread the word. And social media is great for that. But you don't want to forget that, I mean, before I started at Mass, I got phone calls from just friends of friends of friends who knew that they needed it. So not social media at all. It was just, you know, it was connections with the board of directors. You just don't want to paper the world until you capture someone.
Great. And we also got another question asking, what can we do to thank volunteers other than giving a thank you card?
Tell them what they did. Like, itemize it and say, you know, you had a skilled volunteer that was teaching you how to fundraise, teaching your regular volunteers how to fundraise. Well, thank you for coming to 10 of our monthly meetings, and you taught us how to identify leads, and you taught us how to close sales, and you helped us practice our elevator speeches. That's what they did. That's what they want to know, and that's what they can put on their resume and feel good about. So be specific.
Great. And we also got another question asking, during the project process, how do you keep volunteers motivated, especially when you have a virtual office?
Well, I guess that is what matters, because we're a virtual office and we keep ourselves motivated. So I think you've got to find out why they're not being motivated. Because if you're talking to the right person and you're asking them to do what they love to do, there's a reason why they're not motivated. Maybe it's because you're too slow and they're used to this fast pace, or maybe, like, I can't give you an answer. I think that's a symptom of a deeper problem. You got to find out why they're not motivated.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Lelia, for presenting this webinar today. We really appreciate your time and, of course, the amazing resources you've provided us with, as well as our audience. And, of course, thank you to our listeners for joining us again for this webinar, and until next time.